much. Then I'll take questions. I first have Brian Lee from CFI.
Question for you about the technical structure of the account. 100% of students wouldn't end up going on to post-secondary education. The purpose of the fund is to that end. So what if they don't go? I mean, what if you only get half? Half would be a lot better than where you're at now, but what if only half went? What would the other half of the money go to?
Dave, do you want to speak to that?
Sure. As you said, we certainly don't expect with any population that 100% of students would take this up. We propose that the money that is not taken up by students be redistributed in two ways. First, as a possible way of repaying some of the transition costs, because in the initial years, there will be some costs associated with phasing out the PSSSP and replacing it with new accounts for every current registered Indian potential student. So this would be a way to repay some of the transition costs. And another, in the future, once the transition costs have been repaid, we would suggest that the money would then be redistributed to other use accounts.
And the idea is that after graduation, a student would have 10 years to draw on that account. After 10 years, then the money is redistributed to the other purposes that Dave has mentioned. And we think that 10 years is a pretty generous window for people to make a decision to pursue post-secondary education. And this way we guarantee that everyone who thinks they want to pursue post-secondary education has access to the money to do so. If that money isn't used for that purpose, it's recycled for to make that opportunity available to others.
As a follow-up, the current system gives the money to band councils and so on. We saw throughout the years as different proposals have come forward, include the last one of Prime Minister Chrétien, to alter how bands are funded, put in more accountability. That has been fought by certain segments of band leadership across the country. How do you think they would react to this proposal?
I can, let me first answer that from the perspective of what we're trying to accomplish. The bottom line is to try and, if they have the true interests of their band members in mind, education should be the most important thing that they're considering, and how to practically achieve that education should be at the front of their agendas. What we're proposing will ensure that every Aboriginal person is empowered to be in control of their own education. So this takes the decision-making out of anybody's hands and puts it into the hands of the people that count most, the grassroots people. So I think there may be some questions as to this whole issue of Indian control of Indian education is probably what you're thinking about, has arisen in the past. And the question about, I think the original idea of Indian education arose out of residential schools because Aboriginal people were treated terribly and they had absolutely no say in what happened to them in their educational history. But what we're proposing is at the opposite end of the spectrum, not have any government responsible for introducing any kind of patronage or politicizing the decision-making with regard to education. That every young person has the equivalent right, and the funds flow to them directly. And so I think there will probably be mixed views on it, but there are a lot of new progressive educated chiefs that have endorsed this idea already. Some of them have signed on in the paper already.
Yeah, I was just going to point out that one of the ways in which we're going to try and do things a little differently at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute is that we made a point, certainly in this paper, of going out and talking to leaders in Aboriginal communities around the country, and got them to indicate their support for this idea. So we've already begun the dialogue with Aboriginal leaders and also people who have a lot of experience with Aboriginal education around the country, and got them to talk about the reasons why they think this would be a considerable improvement over the status quo for young Aboriginals.
The biggest complaint of Aboriginal student age population is the inconsistency of funding from their own members.
questions. I personally have a question. I just wanted to know how widespread is it a problem that students who would like to go to higher education do not get access to funds right now under the current system?
Dave, could you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Unfortunately, there's no specific data. We can't point to any number with any great certainty of how many students each year are denied funding, simply because there's no mandatory reporting under the current system. Some estimates have said up to several thousand a year. I can't remember the exact number, but the Assembly of First Nations at one time suggested the number might be up in several thousands. From surveys, and some that we cite in this study, of individual students, we know enough to know that it is certainly widespread, that it occurs with students all across the country, that there are some individual bands where all students who apply get funding, but far more often than not, the case is that there are students who are waitlisted, and then the second thing that happens is funding is often rationed with students, and we've seen some mention of this from some of our people who signed on to the statement of support, who say that they actually didn't receive quite enough funding to do all of their post-secondary education, and secondly, often didn't receive word of whether they would receive funding until several weeks either before or right into their education.
Another question from Brian Wood.
The report says that currently the PSSSP costs $314 million. I'm guessing that's annually. Do you know how many students actually get to take advantage of that? I mean, are you able to say that you would, I guess, is it a very small number getting quite a large bit of money? Is that part of the problem?
The number reported by Indian Northern Affairs Canada is roughly 22,000 students a year. But as you suggested, this does not show whether these 22,000 students are receiving full room and board and full tuition, whether they're getting a couple $100s a month to help out. There's no indication whatsoever of how much money these students are receiving. Suggestions in the late 90s where there were as many as 27,000 students being funded at one time, but again, this doesn't say anything about how much funding these students are receiving.
I can give you a personal example of a situation that I'm familiar with, where there's no meritorious criteria or anything applying right now to who gets funded, even though some bands have a very good system. Their things are run fairly. And give you an example of one community I'm familiar with. Are a nephew and a niece of the chief were funded by the chief to attend very exclusive private schools for 3 years, and I believe both of the students eventually dropped out, which was about a $300,000 expense to the band. And there were students that were doing graduate degrees and that couldn't get funding as a result of the chief deciding to fund his relatives who ended up dropping out of school. So that kind of thing happens quite a lot, and education is too important to be politicized. This has become an issue that is not just something that's altruistic that Canada should do to help Aboriginal people out. Given our graying population, we have to get these young people in the workforce. The Center for the Study of Living Standards in Ottawa pointed out various benefits, financial benefits to Canada in doing so. And the one that comes to my mind is their best case scenario is if the Aboriginal population, current Aboriginal population, was educated to the same level as everybody else in mainstream and received comparable pay. That over the cumulative until 2026 could add $400 billion to the GDP of the country. Given our population, our current population's rapid aging, we need those young people in the workforce, particularly in provinces like Manitoba and Saskatchewan, where by 2050, some projections suggest that the Aboriginal population will be over 50%. Somebody's got to pay for things. And so this isn't just an issue of something we're thinking about, and it would be really nice if we could do it. It's in the entire self-interest of the nation to solve this problem. And I believe once we get those young people in the workforce and contributing to society, most people don't realize, in addition, that there's 22 treaties already signed in Northern Canada, and those treaties impact half the Canadian landmass. The amount of wealth that could be created from a young Aboriginal population and the assets that Aboriginal people control, I believe, is the future of Canada.